Welcome now to our final lecture video, and this one is concerning diet. I'm really excited to get to this point because I really want to interject some opinion, and this is kind of the greatest place to do that because probably you know this, that there are thousands, no, let me say millions of voices out there all projecting their ideologies about diet, right? And so the problem here is, which one do you believe? Because while you'll see videos down below here in our file that is dedicated to diet options, you're going to find debates on why those people are right, why those people are wrong, every different ideology out there. I mean, it's incredible and very difficult for us, the laypersons, to go out there and maybe measure up what is going to work for me and what's not. Well, it all comes down to self-experimentation, you finding what really works for you based off of, your caloric needs, your macro needs. Maybe it has to do with even that file down below from that, food allergies. Maybe you have some intolerances to certain foods. And then the other side of this is the whole body inflammation and the microbiome. What all's going on in your gut? That you have certain needs for, the bacteria that are there. I mean, it's just an incredibly large amount of information. And so, honestly, it's hard for me to even find a jumping off point to start talking about diet. But this is basically where I'm at, and this is what I want to share with you for the scope of personal health and wellness. I want to begin by looking at some simple facts. Number one, the term diet is an observation about what you consume. Many times we hear diet and we look at this second definition down here, and it is also restriction. I mean, you can't say that you're on a diet and that you have freedom to eat anything you want, right? If you go on a diet, then you're restricting something. And we'll kind of get into that more as we talk today. But the term diet has two definitions. One, it's an observation of what you consume, but two, it's a restriction of certain things so that your health improves. So I have to kind of start by, and this is an area that I really feel is a pinnacle moment for you in this class, and that's to understand what a processed food is. And I understand that many of you may have never heard this term before. And so if that's you, please really perk up and pay attention here. This is critical that you get through this class and you understand this term. But a processed food is a food or check this out, a food-like substance that's prepackaged and possibly altered, but it's made ready for consumption and it's marketed for your convenience. And so when I think about a processed food, I'm thinking about all those boxes of sugared up cereals on the cereal aisle. I'm thinking about the bags of chips on the chip aisle. I'm thinking about walking down the freezer aisle and finding all these foods that have been put in this little box or package, and there's multiple ingredients in there so that those foods can last for literally years in a freezer or on a shelf. This is a processed food. And I want you to think about, how many processed foods do I consume? If you visit a vending machine, ever, you're consuming a processed food. And here's the other side of this. These are also foods that are abundant in our, you know, food culture, the ones that exist in the McDonald's and the Taco Bells, because they're, basically imperishable. And maybe you'll see a video shortly about what happens with a McDonald's hamburger when it's left sitting for a long time. But anyways, it's imperishable. That's the idea behind processed food, is that it's convenient, it's easy to get to, it's easy to consume, but that it'll last a long time. The ingredient list on these things is incredibly long, and it has unfamiliar and even unidentifiable items on it. When you see my video about hydrogenation and just using simple peanut butter versus Jif peanut butter and the differences between the ingredient list there, it should be alarming to you because peanut butter should just be peanuts, but it's not. That's not how our food culture works. I also included from the heart.org website, and that's the American Heart Association's website, about healthy eating, eating smart, nutritional basics, and processed foods, and kind of some real interesting information there. You're going to see that in the assignment later, and I hope that that's really revealing to you. But one of the things about diet that we should start paying attention to is that we need more real food in our diet. And what is real food? Real food walked on the earth or it grew from the earth. That's real food. And we've kind of left that out. You've probably had a bag of Cheetos, or maybe you've had a package of crackers lately. And what you have to understand is that that is not necessarily real food. Cheetos never was real food. In fact, it's kind of this rehydrogenated cardboard bit thing that comes in a package that they put a bunch of cheese flavor in, right? And when you look at that, you're like, this cannot be real food because it never walked on the earth. It never grew from the earth. Some dude made this in a factory and then put it in a package, and I can eat it 3 years from now. It's going to taste the same. It's weird is what it is, but that's processed foods. The alarming thing that comes up is that Americans, by and large, no pun intended, are gaining weight. And we're doing this rapidly, especially at the age of 30 and on. So we look at this and we understand that one of the facts here is that Americans don't even know they're losing or gaining weight. And that came from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. And this happens at the University of Washington in a 2012 study that we figured out that Americans are completely clueless. Like, we don't really get on that scale very often. And we talked about that in body composition, that they're just not getting on that scale very often. And so they really don't understand that they're gaining weight. Another unique thing is they are getting on the scale somewhat often, but they don't see that they're gaining weight because they've adopted a sedentary lifestyle, and that sedentary lifestyle has actually led them to lose muscle and to lose bone, and so they are gaining fat, but they don't see it because all they're looking at is this gross scale weight, and they think, wow, I'm just maintaining. But I want you to look at this picture right here. This picture really gives us an interesting look into the idea of not being sedentary and what happens. Take a look at this 40-year-old triathlete. That means they bike, they swim, and they run. Look at all this nice muscle mass here, and just on this white color, that is the fat mass. So you see that and you appreciate some really heavy-duty muscle mass in that person's legs. But then let's just go down here. Now we have a 74-year-old sedentary man, but also a 70-year-old triathlete. Take a look there. The muscle mass is depleted. Very, very small, mostly made up of fat. But then you look down here at the 70-year-old triathlete, very similar to our 40-year-old triathlete, lots of muscle mass, just a little bit of fat on the subcutaneous level, but still a great muscle mass. And then I want you to take a peek here. You see that? That is the bone. Take a look at our bone in our 74-year-old sedentary man. It is most likely osteoporotic. It's very much atrophied. And what we also notice is that there's not a lot of muscle here, but a lot of fat. And you look at the leg girth and you're like, well, there's not much difference in the leg girth, right? And that's true. But what is the quality of that girth? And this is something that really has to be alarming to you because you may not notice a substantial difference in the scale into your second, third, fourth decade. But what's alarming here is the tissue variability that has occurred, the changes, the morphology that is there. That's what is alarming. So we come back over here and we look that age 30, a gain on average will occur of about 0.6 to 1.7 pounds annually. Now that doesn't seem like much, but in 10 years, that's up to 17 pounds. And again, 17 pounds is manageable. You can lose that. But it's not easy to do. Men and women under 40 will gain the most weight. Black, Native American, Hispanic, and smokers gain a lot of the weight, and this happens to be from a sedentary lifestyle. Also, chronic disease starts to slip up somewhere between that third and fourth decade. And I have to throw this in as well. Insufficient sleep also contributing to Americans' weight gain. And you know where I'm at with that because I've kind of sent out my soapbox email about that. As we age, though, we add fat, we lose muscle, and we lose bone. And that is the fundamental fact. So, what is it that we can do? We have to incorporate a strategy somewhere. Well, to stay along the ideas of diet, let me address that first. You have two main options. One is you can start counting calories. And to do that, I want to kind of instruct you on how the typical counting calorie methodology works. You have to first know that 3,500 calories equals 1 pound. So if we do that, then what we know is that a surplus of daily or weekly calories will eventually lead to weight gain. A deficit of daily slash weekly calories will lead to weight loss. To start, we need to understand what our basal metabolic rate is. Basal metabolic rate, and if you've ever kind of been around a biology class, you've probably heard a little bit about this, but a basal metabolic rate is the caloric burn your body will do regardless of your activity level. So if you wake up in the morning, you're in bed, you don't get out of bed, you urinate and you defecate on yourself all day, and you end up going back to sleep later that day, that 24-hour cycle, you will burn a specific amount of calories just on your body's own. This is my body's caloric needs to make my body function, right? You didn't do anything else. This is your base metabolic rate. Well, go down below here underneath this, and don't worry, you're going to get to go through this whole process yourself very soon, but just so you kind of can see, the 20-year-old male who's 5'10 and weighs 150 pounds will burn 1,697 calories doing nothing. Now, I have this little asterisk 2,400 calories out there because I want you to know that if you exercise 4 to 5 times a week as a 20-year-old male who's 5'10 and 150 pounds, you're closer to about 2,400 calories per day of just burn. And that's just, listen, that's exercising 4 to 5 times a week. And by the way, that's not intense exercise. That's just kind of, you know, keeping it at the threshold. And so let's look at this. What we know is that most food labels recommend about a 2,000 calorie intake or diet intake every day. So let's just say all of the variables the same. This guy is like spot on American diet, but he's only consuming 2,000 of those calories a day. Well, he's kind of at a 400 calorie deficit, right? And that 400 calorie deficit, if true, in 9 days, he's going to lose a pound. But you know what? He's not really losing weight. He's maintaining. At 20 years old, he's maintaining. Some days he's 149, some days he's 152, but he maintains right at 150 most days. And so what I would want you to understand from that is he's probably not at that deficit, which means he's probably not at that 2,000 calorie intake. Or maybe he is, but on the weekends he splurges a little bit. And so instead of being 2,000 on the weekends, maybe he's closer to 3 because, you know, he might hammer a couple of extra pieces of pizza, or maybe he eats a lot of dessert, or maybe he drinks a lot of beer, or just maybe he's intaking a lot more soda. I have no idea, but there's variables out there that we have to consider kind of coming in. So when you perform your own metabolic rate, you're going to look at that and you're going to be really impressed. And then when you look over at the activity level, maybe you can match it up and you're like, hey, look, I've really got this going for me. And then you add up all your calories and you're like, but Kendall said I should be losing weight because I have a deficit. But that may not be the case. Maybe you're maintaining. Well, then I would tell you to look at that a little closer. Look at those days of the week where you're not exercising and you're eating maybe more, or maybe you just flat got it wrong. Maybe you got it wrong when you did your calculations on your calories. But something's going on, because one thing is for certain. If you're looking at calories in, calories out, surplus, deficit, you're going to get weight gain, weight loss. If you're maintaining, staying the same, then what is happening here is you're pretty much balancing out the equation of intake and output. So that's kind of complicated to do, keeping up with all these calories in food. One of the easier things, and kind of the thing that I practice a lot, is counting my macros. Um, I'm very specific about that. And, we talked about this earlier in our talks with body composition. You're basically going to pull in and then categorize your macros into three ways, and one's going to take over the majority of your intake, one's going to kind of be the moderate part of your intake, and one's going to be the minimal part of your intake. Well, historically, I used to be very adamant that most of my intake, because I ran a lot, I rode bikes, I just like to live a very active lifestyle, and that was my hobby, that I needed carbohydrates to fuel and fund the activity levels I was doing. What I found was that kind of mentality, wasn't absolutely accurate, which was a hard pill to swallow. And I changed some things. I actually moved to more of a lower carbohydrate diet. And now, what my diet looks like, probably very interestingly, is this larger group right here is dietary fats. This moderate group here is dietary proteins, and a very small portion is my carbohydrates now. I've really flipped it, and I feel really good. I've had some really interesting um, biological events happen because of that. I don't want to get too far into that yet, because I'll share that more in my video over your course project. But one of the things that we know has to look at here for counting our macros is, again, we go back to the fats that have that 9 calories. We look at our proteins with 4 and our carbohydrates with 4. And so instead of counting every calorie, what we're doing is we're kind of setting our threshold or our set point. For me specifically, I like to go between anywhere 30 to 50 carbohydrates a day. And so if I do that, 50 carbohydrates a day at 4 calories per carb, well, that's a simple little mathematical equation, and saying, boom, 200 right there. So I have 200 calories that I get from my carbs every day. So I just basically input that there, as long as I stay below my 50. And then with proteins, I try to get around 150. Well, 150 times 4, that adds up pretty quick to, right? So there I am at 600. And if I get 600 calories from proteins, well, I just take that and I stack that in there. And now all of a sudden I'm at 800 total calories for the day. And then my fats, well, there's 9 calories per gram, and I try to get about 150 grams of fats a day. Well, you look at that and you end up somewhere around 13 and 1,350 calories. And so before I know it, I'm sitting, roughly around 2,100 calories for my daily intake, which is pretty spot on for me specifically. And knowing kind of what my BMR is and knowing what my activity level is, that's a great little maintenance. But it gives me some freedom. We look at this as restrictive, yes, but it also gives me freedom, because now I know kind of my set points, and I can go in there and I can figure this pretty quickly, and I can just kind of keep track of, oh, okay, I hate a banana, it's 20 carbs. Well, there's 20 of my 50 right there. And so I just kind of keep an eye on that. But you know what has helped me is understanding from the macronutrient tracking what's in my food. I'm paying attention to that more. If I eat a steak, which I'm going to do that tonight, I'm actually having a steak tonight. Um, there's 80 grams of protein on this cut of steak. I've already kind of looked at it and I know how many ounces of steak it is. And I'm looking at kind of off of the uh, typical presentation of this steak. And there's zero carbs. As far as fats are concerned, that varies, you know, depending on the cut of meat. But I also know that there's quite a bit of fat in this, and that's my upper level of fat intake for the day. But again, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of it's very freeing, it's very easy to do, and I can just kind of monitor that through the course of the day, and bam, I can see what my calories are based off of my macronutrients, right? And so, you know, do I have a 2,000 calorie intake per day? No, absolutely not. In fact, I'm upwards to sometimes 23 to 2,400 some days, and even sometimes on the weekends it gets closer to 3,000. But I just back that off on my weekdays, and that's how I balance it out and keep the maintenance of my weight there. So, with that being said, you're going to have to kind of make your decision on, you know, what is it that I could do? Well, macronutrients, again, is the easiest way to count that. But, you know, some people are like really intense and they're like, no, I want to count my calories. Okay, get after it, do that. For me, though, I have 6 recommendations that I want to leave you with. I'm going to give you some dietary options in this folder down below this video. I don't recommend that you do any of them. I just recommend that you be knowledgeable about them. I'm not making any recommendations that you should be tied into any specific diet other than what works for you. So please don't think that I'm advocating any. Now, these things right here, through my own personal experience, have become very, very helpful. And so that's why I want to present them. Number one is fasting. And many of us really have an aversion to the idea of fasting. I use fasting both for spiritual practice, but also in my daily food intake and dietary restrictions. Because basically, what I want to do is I want to restrict the window of which I eat. And that helps me to reduce how many calories I'm consuming a day. And I'm not talking about starvation here. There's a big difference. Starvation is typically forced upon someone. Fasting is completely optional and it is completely your choice. Me personally, I practice an 18-6 fasting window or intermittent fasting where I will fast for 18 hours in a day and I'll eat for 6 hours in the day. And that just kind of helps me to not think about food so much. It also gives my body a break from digestion. There's this really cool thing that happens called autophagy. AUTOPHAGY, where I'm starting to consume some of those cells that are no longer important. And that's kind of something I've worked up to. When I first started this, I was really big at doing 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. And I just found that it was really easy to make that next step up. Again, it's not starvation. Starvation, and we're going to talk about eating disorders here in a minute, that kind of lends itself that way. It's an unhealthy body image thing. What I find is that I'm really good. In fact, right now it's noon, right on the money, and I'm recording this video, and I've not broken my fast yet. But I'm looking forward to doing that as soon as I conclude this video. But you know, I'm really comfortable. I'm not hurting. I'm not, you know, constantly watching the clock for when can I eat. But that wasn't always the case. It was a very difficult transition to make. But now I've been doing this for over a year and I find that it's very, very satisfying. But it also helps me to control my calories intake, but it also controls my weight. Here's a cool little study right here from ScienceDaily.com where they looked at 50,000 participants who used an 18-hour window fasting, made breakfast their biggest meal of the day, and basically didn't eat much after, especially late at night. And they really had some great things happen. I've also included this video right here from dietdoctor.com about how to get started on fasting and making some really unique adjustments for their own health. It's by Dr. Jason Fung, who is a nephrologist and has advocated fasting from controlling a lot of chronic disease, but also helping to control weight. Another thing that I want to talk to you about here is cooking and food preparation at home. I am a huge advocate for saying stop eating out, mainly because your budget doesn't like it. And what I did here was I included you a little study on what actually happens with budgets, but also what happens with waistlines when you eat more at home. They've connected to they've connected in these studies that the more you eat out, the more calories you consume. And so it's no wonder that people who eat out more than they cook at home will gain more calories. And many people really kind of evert to that too, and they say, you don't understand my schedule, I have to eat out. Well, for you who want to put that debate forward, what I want to say is take a look at my video over food prep. And what you'll understand is that when the research is done, you actually save time eating at home versus eating out. You just think you're saving time by eating out because you're not having to make the food. But when you drive to the restaurant, you sit there and you wait, and then you get home. Yeah, you don't have dishes to do, but you have calories now to burn, and you also have money that you need to make to replace what it is that you spent on that more expensive food. Anyways, you take a look at the research, you give me some feedback on what you think. Nutrition label literacy is another thing. Understanding how to read labels. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that specifically, but I did link you with a video so that you can identify how to do that on your own. And I highly recommend that you become very literal or literate in food labels and understanding what those mean. Keep in mind your macronutrients and the balance of what you need from your food and identify that through your labels. I also recommend food diversity. I myself do practice more of a low carb, high fat diet, but in that I also make sure that I am consuming a lot of diverse foods. I am not against vegetables. I am not against meat. I am not against legumes. I am not against fruits. I think that all of these things make a huge part on our gut health, but also our long-term health. And I try to really incorporate that and make diversity a big part of what I do. I am low carb, but I also have days where I recarb or carb cycle. And I use carbs based off of kind of how I feel, but also knowing that I need to bring those back in because they have value. I also want to recommend that you consider regular exercise. We looked at that back in several modules where we talked about aerobic exercise 3 to 5 times a week. We talked about strength training 2 to 3 times a week. We talked about flexibility happening 2 to 3 times a week. I would say to you, look at the evidence out there of people who regularly exercise and what happens with their body composition, and understand that you will always have a better body composition, but you will also push back against chronic disease, obesity, and obesity-related diseases. You'll also push back against impairments from arthritis, osteoporosis, and other conditions that could cause you to have limitations in your life. Finally, I want to say this. Processed foods are just a bad way to go. Anything out of a bag, anything out of a restaurant, anything out of a box or a package should be like very, very limited. I'm not saying don't eat out. I'm not saying don't eat Cheez-Its every once in a while if Cheez-Its are just like your passion. But I'm saying they're not something that you should consume regularly. I had a conversation the other day with a young man who said, I eat a lot of French fries. What do you think about that? Well, there's a stark difference in the potatoes that I take and I cut up and I cook in olive oil and I salt and I serve to my family than the French fries that you get at McDonald's that are produced in a massive factory that are chemically cured to last a long time and then fried in heaven only knows what and then served to you. There's a massive difference there. So when you consider the difference, yeah, they're both a carbohydrate. Yeah, and they happen to be cooked in my home and they happen to be much less processed and much healthier for my children than what I could buy at McDonald's. And I also will venture to say this, and I know I'm stepping on toes here, they're better. I just cook better French fries at McDonald's. If you don't believe me, come over to my house, I'll cook you some. But no processed foods as often as you can. I want to leave you with one other thing, and that is this. With diet always comes up the idea that maybe there's a body image issue. If this is for you, if you are struggling with an eating disorder, then I'd like for you to click on this link right here. I would like for you to find help. Eating disorders are very real. In fact, at least 30 million people of all ages and genders suffer from an eating disorder in the US. Every 62 minutes, at least one person dies as a direct result from an eating disorder, and eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. What I need you to understand is this. I have friends who have had who have had eating disorders. It's not a game. It is very serious. If you or you know someone who does have an eating disorder, then please help them to have help. It's very difficult to manage. And so there's a stark difference between fasting and an eating disorder like anorexia, who is a person who doesn't eat. There's a stark difference between diet and healthy eating versus bulimia. So please consider as we go forward and as you go forward in your own health journey that we need balance. And that is the crucial mark of personal health and wellness. I hope you've enjoyed all the content. I can't wait to see some of the things that you're finishing up on. See you real soon.